to everybody here tonight. Take your Bibles to Esther. The book of Esther. I think I mentioned it last Wednesday night, that we wouldn't jump into Proverbs tonight, because next Wednesday, I'll be preaching at a little church on the Ohio River. The church is in West Virginia, and the motel we stay in is in Ohio, or vice versa. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've been there. So Esther. So I don't want to split up the Proverbs. So we'll jump on 18 in a couple weeks. Most anybody spending in church any length of time has read through. Short book, great story, overwhelming, great story. And so I thought I'd highlight another lady in the scriptures, although there's a guy, I think it's John Butler, right? He's wrote a bunch of books, Old Testament, New Testament. He calls his book on Esther Mordecai. So I still feel like the predominant person in the book of Esther is God, although God's not mentioned. I don't know if you've probably heard that before. No, he's not mentioned anywhere. Even when she's in her dire straits of wondering what to do, she talks about fasting, but really doesn't, just kind of alludes to praying. And you can ask all kinds of questions, and I can give you all the answers that I've read, but, for whatever reason, God just left his name out of this book. But his work is so vividly expressed throughout this book. Maybe, here's one takeaway. I'll just throw this one out. There's a whole bunch of them, but it's just opinions on why his name is not in here. Mordecai and Esther, and we probably talk about this when we jump into the book. We're just going to kind of look at the backstory up through chapter 4. It would have been easy for Mordecai and Esther in the situation they were in to thinking that God was absent from their lives. Absent. The captivity and everything that was going on, the ordeal that she gets brought into. You could just think that God's nowhere to be found. And probably everybody in this room at some point in time in your life, you might not have verbalized that, but you felt it. You felt like you were alone. Theology says you're not, but the present situation screams that you are. Or that God's not listening, or God's not interested, or he's busy. So I think maybe that's one of the takeaways from the book of Esther, so that when we go through something like they went through, that we'll always know God's there, and God's working, and God's got a plan. So just again a reminder, Mordecai, Esther, along with a whole pile of other people that we know in the scriptures. It could be Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and the list goes on, of individuals that either were involved preaching and prophesying before the captivities began, first and second. They got the 10 northern, then they got the 2, and some ended up getting put into exile. Some, like Esther, Mordecai, Daniel, lived a chunk of their life in exile. Daniel, most I've read, never made it back. I think he was still living when they started going back under the Medes and the Persians, so with Cyrus. But again, their lives was really a rough time frame. This was a rough time frame to live under captivity. You kind of get a little bit of it. The first 2 chapters, or really chapter 1, chapter 2 is when the king Ahasuerus decides he's going to, get him another wife, because if you read chapter 1, you kind of know why she didn't want to go. Even as a pagan king's wife, they've been having this party for months, and it's just a room full of drunk men. So you can imagine why she wouldn't want to be strutted around in that room, right? So that ticks him off, and of course she's kicked to the curb. And in 2 is when he's going through this process of just gathering up beautiful virgin girls, to come to like a beauty pageant. I don't know any other way to do it. And Esther's one of them. We introduced to them in verse 5, Shushan, where the palace was, and apparently Mordecai had some kind of a job at the gate, some kind of job where he could kind of keep tabs on Esther when she got into this situation, kind of keep up with how things were going, which was kind of a God thing, you know. The fact, think about this when I say this. It was a God thing that she found favor with the people in the king's harem, and that she found favor with the king. Pagan king, Gentile king. God gave her favor with him, them, because there was a plan that would still sound real confusing because this wicked king's involved in it. So I just want you to, and you probably felt this way and thought this as you work your way through this book, how difficult it would have been for Mordecai, the uncle that adopted her because she had no parents, would feel about her thrown into this situation. And then her when she gets into the situation. And we won't read all the verses that are there. Verse 11 kind of gives you that idea that Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. So he's somewhere where he can get notes passed in, because they're going to have a full-blown conversation in 4, and apparently he couldn't get to where she was, but he could get word to her so they could have back and forth. Again, it was a gracious thing. Verse 9, that favor of God with the others. It says, he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. You could say the same thing about Daniel. You go to Daniel, Daniel was preferred. God's grace was there in a terrible place. You might have to really sometimes look for grace, and sometimes it might be invisible. I don't know that they were aware that the favor they were experiencing was from God. Where she was, that they liked her, didn't change where she was. Made it easier, made it more comfortable. Now, one of the things that Mordecai tells her, and she keeps quiet about that until it gets really bad, further in the book of Esther, is to just downplay who she was, Jew. And maybe the Jewish people had become so part of this culture, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they've just been there so long, and skin tones and things like that, they would not just have known that's a Jew. They just know that's Mordecai that works at the gate, and that's the gal that he adopted, and she's beautiful, so she's one of them. So, but he said, don't mention the fact that you're a Jew. It goes on. In fact, you can read the verses, because that's not really the thrust. I want us to think about that. Here's two people, both captives, both feel like they're just at the mercy of a wicked kingdom, a wicked king. There's bound to be Christians in the Ukraine that feel that way. There's Christians in Iran that feel that way. I don't know if we've ever felt to the level that they felt that way in our life. We probably felt alone. We've probably felt at the mercy of a culture or a government or circumstances that we couldn't pay or manipulate or fix, be it physical or otherwise. That's where they were. The captivity, this terrible situation where she's brought into a harem and she knows why she's there, to be either picked or a concubine. That's basically, she's either going to be a queen or a concubine. And a concubine just simply means you got no rights, no privileges, you won't get any inheritance, and that's just if king just wants somebody different. So that's where she's at. That's the dilemma she's in. She's either going to be the queen. You think she was going to be queen? You think that was running through her mind? I'm the next queen. I have no idea what was going through her mind. But I don't think any of them were like happy thoughts. Wonderful. So just feel the backstory of that when it does happen. And we'll just look at the end of it in verse 17. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now that eased off maybe somewhat of maybe what had been going around in her head. I'm at least going to be this man's wife. I'm going to share him. Because I know about 300, women that's probably in the concubine room over there. I'm not going to be a concubine. Never going to see Mordecai maybe again. As a Jew, implications of this book is Mordecai and Esther were involved in God's plan. Even though they might not have understood hardly anything about God's plan. In fact, everything would scream that there was no plan. We're in exile. We've been in exile for a long time. I could not stop this happening. And there goes the girl that I've protected and loved on because her parents are dead and she's family, but I couldn't stop this from happening. And there she is. And now she's the queen. And I'm not thinking he's happy. Maybe comforted that she's not the concubine and she is the queen. So again, just feel that as much as you can. So here's what I want us to see at the end of chapter 2. And I mean, it's in the Bible, so it's obviously something we need to ponder and think about. So all that's happened. They've had them a big old feast, and celebrating Queen Esther now. And she's still not shown her kindred, verse 20. That's what Mordecai told her to do. And she's still trying to be good to Mordecai's word. And you just get 21, 22, and 23. And if you've read the book and you've seen the book and you understand the book, what's about to happen is in God's plan. Big one. That's going to happen. Esther, clueless. Mordecai, clueless. But there's something about to happen in Mordecai's life, and what he does will have a bearing on what God's going to do at some point. And nobody knows. Stuff like that happens all the time in your life and my life. Because it's easy for us to be wrapped up in a world not near as confused and as chaotic that would have been going on in their brains and their hearts and their minds in this text, in their narrative, but that's going on in yours. It might seem insignificant. It might seem small. It might seem like a paragraph. So in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king. And the thing was known to Mordecai. So he hears about it, knows about it, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. Made sure that she got the word to the king that it was Mordecai, the guy that works down at the gate, and she's certifying its truth. Well, they do an inquisition. Was made of the matter. It was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now, that ain't the Chronicles in the Bible. That's just the Chronicles that he keeps up with what stuff happens on a day-to-day basis. And here's another thing that's, again, it's providential. Nothing is done. And y'all know this. You've read the book. Nothing's done at this moment. It's going to be done sometime in the future. But nothing happens here purposely. And I know why it didn't happen here. I don't know why Joseph was in prison 2 more years. Have no idea. There's going to be stuff in your life that you're not going to know why there was a gap. Sometimes you're going to get the answer and you're going to go, wow. A lot of times you're not. And you can either allow those things to dangle around in your brain, mess up your heart, confuse you about God, make you think God ain't good no more or He's forgot you, or you can just say, God, great. So I didn't get that job here. This fell through. Never heard back. And I was sure. So again, there's a gap, but in this particular case, we know why nothing was mentioned. Nothing's done here. He's not paraded around the streets from saving, the king's life, and he didn't get a big check or a gold chain or nothing. Nothing happens. And again, that's all providence. That's all God. And maybe, like I said earlier, maybe why God's left out of the book is He wanted us to feel that they probably felt like, God's maybe working somewhere else and not really working here around us. So in chapter 3, and we won't spend a whole lot of time in chapter 3 either, that's Mordecai's opportunity and a decision and a choice right there. He could have thought, I'll just keep this to myself and maybe he'll get whacked. Maybe he'll die. Serve him right. But he does the right thing. Turns in the plot, satisfied, king's life spared, pagan king. He had to be a little bit mad at this guy that just snatched this gal that he loved. But he does the right thing. He had an opportunity, made a decision, made a choice. In this particular case, it was just doing right. I don't know that he was thinking spiritual. It's always spiritual to do right. It's always biblical to do right. But he's just doing right. So he does right. And really everything in this story is wrong. The exile, the circus that Esther was in before she's crowned queen, all of that looked wrong. All of that looked chaos. But here's Mordecai just doing what's right. Haman is in chapter 3, and chapter 3 kind of falls out Haman's evil plan. And Haman and Mordecai, and again, this kind of shows you that Mordecai has a spiritual aspect to his life because he ain't going to bow down to some man. So again, here's another God thing. There's something going on in Mordecai's mind. Like Daniel, right? Like the 3 children ain't bowing down. And so since he's not giving homage to some man, Haman hates him. And don't just hate him, he hates the Jews. So he knows he knows Mordecai's a Jew, and he's not just going to take out his anger and hate on him. He's going to have them all killed. And the king, the pagan, Esther's husband, he's easily duped into doing it. Just a little bit of buttering up and a little bit of this and that, and he's all in favor. He's all in favor because it's going to get him money. These Jewish people, they're rich. They got money. They got stuff. And we'll get all that stuff. So chapter 4, that's when we get to chapter 4. Chapter 4 starts out with just literally mourning and weeping. Mordecai, the Jewish people. And word gets to Esther in verse 4. Esther's trying to, maybe she's not privy to what's going on with Haman and the plot. And she lived in a different world, She wasn't in the day-to-day society, and news flashes wasn't, coming across the ticker tape on the TV or whatever. So she didn't maybe know anything that was going on. And again, nobody knows she's a Jew at this point. And so she's trying to encourage Mordecai because she hears that he's fasting, weeping, wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So her people are burdened and weeping and tore up about something, Haman's evil plan. And she sends him, garments. And he won't receive them. And now she's really upset. And she says, I need to know what it was and why it was. And so that's when we kind of get this back and forth. I don't know if it's passing notes or if it was this guy just totally remembering everything that was said. This guy, Hatak or whatever, however you pronounce his name, Hatak. I didn't look to see how you pronounce it. Verse 7. Mordecai told him of all that happened unto him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them, and gave the copy of the writing to the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them. So he's sharing stories, but he's also sharing documents to show it unto Esther. And here's where he makes his you got to do something. Go in unto the king to make supplications unto him and to make requests before him for her people. Now, I don't know if he understood everything that was involved in what Esther, because Esther kind of explained some of the decorum that might have been within, even as the queen, she just couldn't go pop into the king's office one day. That don't make sense to us since the king was your husband, but that was the thing. But he did understand that what he was asking Esther to do was risky. I mean, what was she going to say? How was she going to say it? It's not like she's a political power. He loves her, but he loves her like a pagan. God's favored her, but I don't know how much she's thinking. God's got a purpose here. God's got a plan here. Like we know, we understand. But she was in a little bit darker situation, less information about how God works. And of course, so she pushes back. She pushes back in 10 and 11. And then she mentioned at the end of 11, but I have not been called to come in unto the king for 30 days. I ain't seen the king in 30 days. Now there's stuff, and I don't want to get caught in the weeds, but there's things that happen in 3 and 4. There's years in between this, because he was doing some fighting and battles, and so there's some distance between here. So stuff's happened between 3 and 4, and for 30 days, Esther's had no contact with the king. 13, Mordecai, pushing the envelope. Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Don't think that once he finds out you're a Jew too, and the decree's signed, and you're on the list you're a Jew, that you're going to escape this. And then here's probably the most God verse maybe in the book of Esther. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God's at work here. Now, he had lots of questions about the exile, even though he knew the exile was because of forefathers' disobedience. He knew that. So he knew that was a God righteous discipline, judgment. He knew that, but he still didn't like it. He's exiled. He had to be really clueless about how he let our little girl, but maybe this is it. You don't like it, I don't like it. Esther, I know we don't like it. But he's also got faith enough to believe that God will do something through some other vehicle. That's got to be faith. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. So he's really putting pressure on her. And who knoweth? And again, this might be the phrase, in the book of Esther that kind of screams the Lord. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He narrows it down from just this time, that God will do something else believing that God's going to spare his people, but maybe you are there at this time, in that kingdom, in that position, to do what needs to be done. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer: Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me. And neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. I mean, it's just a great little phrase here, and you've heard it your whole life. And if I perish, I perish. That's some pretty bold words there. She knew the risk. Mordecai, on some level, knew the risk. But she said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Let me give you a little bit of thoughts here. I'm not going to the rest of the book is intriguing, but I don't want to take up the time, because the way she does it was not like all at once. You've read the story. It was almost like intriguing. She goes to the king, and he says, half of my kingdom. He says, well, a banquet, and then a banquet. And she took her time, and through the process of taking time, was in the process of her taking time to do what she did, that the king couldn't sleep. The king reads the Chronicles. Shoot, I forgot to do anything for Mordecai. Haman's that morning in there. You know the story. He asked Haman, what should I do for somebody that just really did a great thing? I mean, like what could I do? And Haman, he's so full of himself, he said, well, let me just tell you, because he's bound to be thinking about me. And so he got all this stuff, put him on a horse, take him through the city, put gold put stuff on his face. And then he tells Haman, that's right. That's what we need to do. So you go get Mordecai and do that. She didn't just knee-jerk into some reaction. She prayed, fasted. We believe she prayed, fasted, came up with a plan, and through series of a banquet and then a sleepless night and Haman being goofy, and then by the time you get to the second banquet, he is in a mess. And he's blubbered all over the place. Next thing you know, he's hanging on the gallows. There was obvious need here. There was obvious risk. But I do honestly believe in this passage, maybe from Esther, obviously from Mordecai, he knew something was up. Providence was at work. So Esther's response was submission. She had to live out this faith. She had to live out that God might have a plan for me being here. Makes no sense, you know. We're not supposed to marry Gentiles. And God's orchestrated, allowed, whatever word you want to use, this to happen. Here I am in the palace. Even when God's plan don't make no sense. She surrendered to it. She lived out her faith. It was obviously part of a bigger plan, you know. Both were forced to consider the hard topic. Both were forced to consider eternal things. When we get put in these situations, nobody would put this in her daytime. They know there would no little Jewish girl want to be the queen in his world. No Mordecai would want to save this precious little girl because mom and daddy's dead and his family member. Nobody would want to live in exile. So these things would not be chosen, but they're there. They were forced to find the eternal in it. That's what believers do. They don't run from it. They don't hide from it. They don't complain about it. Well, we do, but in the complaints we get through it. Kind of like Sunday morning. We're bitter and we're crying, but at the same time, we're praying. because God can do something. So we see that. So I want to give you some takeaways tonight from this first half of this story of Esther. 4 little things take away to think about. 1, never underestimate that God's always working. That's so easy to come off the lips. Never underestimate that God's always working. When it don't look like there's no way God's in this. This has to be. Now look, sin, sometimes we get our own self into messes. But we don't know of anything in this passage. Our podcast is on the book of Job. I don't know of anything in Job's life in particular, other than he was a flawed man like you and me. I don't think there was any reason that God did what he did for any specific sin. But he did allow it to happen. And it did shape his life. And that's the answer. God's always working. If it is your sin, if it's not your sin, if it's just providence, if it makes no sense, how could God? Asaph, I mentioned him Monday night. The thing that Asaph, the second one in Psalm 74, the thing he's bothered with is this very thing. He is ticked off at God that God, listen, he was saying, God, I know we're bad people, but how can you use the Babylons, that's a whole lot worse than us, to judge us? We can think that. God, this is messed up. Never underestimate that God's always working. Always working. Whether you can see it, feel it, or not. Never underestimate that God's always working. Second thing, and we can make application from that little thought with what Mordecai did at the first part of the story, because since he did that and got the delayed whatever reward, that fit into God's plan. Even in that, God was working. Insignificant little things. Second thing, righteous living is always important. Nothing's insignificant. That kind of goes back to Mordecai. So it's always right to do right. And we've learned that in the book of Proverbs. If we learned anything going through the book of Proverbs, you just do right. You just live right. You don't even do something wrong to get a right outcome. You just do right. So again, you see him, Mordecai, doing a righteous thing in sharing the news to spare an unrighteous king that had grabbed his niece and others and wedded the niece. So he did a righteous thing. Righteous living is just always right. Always right. Third thing, and everybody knows this, but it's something we just need to be reminded of. There's more than you in your picture. There's more going on with you than you. Always. Always. It might just be your kids. It might just be your kids. There's always something bigger going on with you. God's always working in your life or my life. For us, yes. And we could think about Hannah again. And yes, God was gracious and merciful to her to give her a baby, and a baby boy. But that baby boy was also given to Israel. What was going on here was way bigger than just Esther and just Mordecai. The whole nation of Israel was dependent on what she did, how she responded. And that's just as true in your life. And you might not ever know the others involved in you till you get to heaven. Till you get to heaven. I know I told y'all that story. I don't think I've mentioned it lately. Maybe I have. If I have, I might tell you again. But it was in my younger days, and I'd been invited to go to somewhere in West Virginia and preach, and I was going to preach that Sunday, and they wanted me to come up on a Friday night and do an all-nighter. I wouldn't do that now, but I'm too old. But I did it then. So we was up all night, and I was going to preach about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I did. About 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, I preached my little message to about 100 kids that were sweating and stinking. And I don't know if they heard anything I said, especially the 3 who was on the front row. I mean, they were just moving and laughing and giggling. And I've never been one of them that could call them out in the middle of something. I might go talk to them privately afterwards, where it's just me, them, and God. And I'm not saying anybody call them out in public is bad. I'm just saying that's me. Well, the one that was in the middle that was kind of the instigator, always just punching the ones beside him on either whatever. And he came to me and said, can I talk to you a minute? I said, sure. And he said, while you were talking, he said, I didn't hear much you said. And I said, well, I kind of figured that. He said, but while you were talking, I remembered my Awana teacher. And I'm lost. And I need to be saved. Now, y'all, you think that Awana teacher? No, that kid was 20 years old. Hadn't seen his Awana teacher since he was 6. And I told him, I said, you need to go home in the morning, wait a little while, don't call her too early, and let her know. What God's doing in your life is bigger than you. Bigger than you. Last thing. Trust, surrender in what you can't see and you can't understand. Just trust God. You've heard me say it 1,000 times. You got 2 choices. You can lose your mind or trust God. And I've lost my mind. Sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, sometimes for months. I'll have a couple good days and 2 bad days and 4 good days and 1 bad day. Trust is all I got. We are believers. We don't have to see to believe. We believe to see. That's who we are. Because we know who our God is. Both of them could trust. Even when they couldn't see nor understand. And we've got to be able to do that too. All right. Heads are bowed. Eyes are closed. We'll have a word of prayer and then we'll share and take some prayer requests. Father, thank you. Thank you for every book of the Bible. Even for those that, like this one, that doesn't really have your name. But boy, your work, your plan, your providence, your grace, your mercy is seen throughout the story. May we ever learn from every story in the Bible that you can be trusted. And that the most confusing and hard to understand times in our lives, you are there. And when there seems to be absolutely no plan, or if there was one, it has been torn up and shredded, but it's still there. May we trust you. May we find the end of a thing is better. It's just really better when we get to the end of it. And the end of it might be heaven. Or we might see it all come to fruition like they did in the book of Esther. But help us to trust you. And Father, we ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.